Whips are not battlefield weapons, that's for sure. They aren't very effective in single combat either, but they are stylish and there are some interesting tricks you can do with a whip. Let's explore the realm of whips and see what they can be used for. Whip is an average difficulty skill. I would also like to mention the other two whip skills. Force whip is another average skill that governs the use of whips made of energy or force. It might seem like this is a strictly sci-fi skill, but there are many spells and abilities that require this skill, such as lightning whip or fire whip. Such whips usually can only strike for damage but not entangle. There's also the monowire whip. It's a hard difficulty skill that is used with monomolecular wires with weights. This is going to be a special video because I will cover this weapon even though it's very unlikely to be used in your traditional fantasy game. I just want to cover all melee weapon skills. Let's check the weapon table in GURPS low-tech. There is only 3 weapons there. Whips and light whips do not have a fixed length. You can buy a whip of any length from 1 to 7 yards. Each yard increases reach, weight, cost and strength requirement. The light whip requires ST3 plus 1 per yard. The normal whip requires 5 ST plus 1 per yard. Whips are melee weapons with the longest reach possible on low TLs, but you have to take a ready maneuver to adjust reach. As you can see on the table, damage is very low and it has a fractional armor divisor, so do not expect heads to roll. Damage type is crushing, while some other RPG systems make whips deal cutting damage. Parry is awful, a -2 penalty and unbalanced. Sure, you can mitigate the unbalancedness with defensive attacks, but -2 still sucks. This is definitely not a defensive weapon. This looks very underwhelming, but whips also have many special rules on page 406 of GURPS basic set. First, when you attack to disarm, you get a +2 in the ensuing quick contest, just like when using a Jitte or Sai. Second, you can use a whip to entangle the opponent instead of damaging him. This attack is resolved at a -4 penalty and uses the lariat rules. For more on that, watch my last video. This aspect of whip use can be improved with the entangle technique from GURPS martial arts. Unlike the Kusaris, whips do not behave like flails. There is no penalty to parry them and they do not entangle weapons on a parry. Sucks to be a whip user. If you have a whip longer than 1 yard, then it becomes unready after an attack or a parry. It takes 1 turn to ready a 2-yard whip and 2 turns to ready a longer whip. I highly recommend getting the Reach Mastery perk to be able to change reach as a free action. However, you should keep in mind that this does not affect time required to ready a long whip after attacking or parrying. I will link Chrom's post on that topic in the description. To be able to ready a whip quicker, you will have to use the extra ready approach that I talked about in the video about two-handed axes and maces. Now there is something unique to whips. Kusari cannot do that. You can crack a whip. This is the sound of the tip breaking the sound barrier. Your whip roll is at -4, but you get +2 to damage. GURPS martial arts introduces a technique that lets you buy off this penalty. Also, any whip blow is painful. Anyone who suffers a whip wound to his arm or hand must roll against will, modified by the shock penalty for the injury. On a failure, he drops anything in that hand. This can be very useful. I should mention that there is a fast draw flexible specialty that was introduced in GURPS martial arts. Force and monowire whips are readied with fast draw force sword. GURPS martial arts also has rules for tying up the target you entangled with your whip. GURPS Fantasy Tech 2 has diabolical whips. They are cinematic weapons that have all the upsides of whips, but none of the downsides. I am not a fan of such trade-offs. However, the barbed whip modifier that is written there sounds good for a D&D style game. I would allow that on normal whips. The last weapon on the whip table is special, the Urumi. It's not a whip, but a long, flexible sword that is used to whip the target. Blunt and sharp versions exist, but they cost the same. The Urumi can deal crushing damage or cutting damage with a fractional armor divisor. Blunt Urumi can only deal crushing damage. The Urumi is still unbalanced and bad at parrying. It is also quite expensive. The Urumi can only attack the target normally, none of the special whip rules apply, so no entanglement, no readying and no cracking. The text also mentions shorter versions. They are worn like metal belts and are consequently known as belt swords. These get +1 to hold out, but lack a useful handguard. This gives an additional -1 to parry. Now I would also like to briefly talk about the monowire whip. This is an ultra-tech, super science weapon that uses its own skill. It deals good damage with an armor divisor of 10. A control allows you to vary length from 1 to 7 yards, changing both reach and ready time. Adjusting the length requires a ready maneuver. When used to snare an opponent or a weapon, the whip cuts into the target, inflicting thrust +1d cutting damage with the armor divisor of 10 every turn it is pulled taut until the victim escapes. A drop weapon critical miss indicates that you have hit yourself or a friend. It's a cool weapon that I have never seen in use. And that's it, I am done with all the melee weapons. As you can see, the whip shouldn't be your weapon of choice if you want to deal a lot of damage, but weakening your enemies by disarming and entangling them is something the whip can easily do. Thank you for watching and I'll see you next time.